All right, let's pray and we'll get started. Lord, thank you for giving us all the time and energy to be here tonight and come together over Zoom. And thank you for giving us the tools and resources and just skill sets that we all need to make this happen. I pray that you would be with us tonight and be with Debbie as she shares her testimony and her story of what you're doing and what you have done with us. I pray that you would teach us through that and through the words that you're giving to Debbie. In your name, amen.
Thank you, Joel. Well, hi, everyone. So kind of excited about this. I love talking about what God has done, but it's not always easy. So I've been kind of thinking about this word testimony and what it means, and looking up online, different examples of testimony and stuff, and they seem to all kind of fall into a format that doesn't really work for me. So I'm going to use the word story instead of testimony. So I'm going to start with a story written by a young man named, well, he's probably not as young anymore, Dwight Bowers. So here we go. I was 18 and working full-time as an auto mechanic. I was not a Christian, but was brought up in church. It was a weekday and my day off, so I headed out for a ride on my motorcycle. I noticed my neighbor across the street was working on his car. I had never met him before, so I assumed he knew what he was doing. He had tools laid out and was looking very qualified to do the repairs. I rode off on my motorcycle, and as I passed him, a voice in my head said, "Go back and check on him." I tried to dismiss the voice, but could not. I returned to ask him if he was okay. I figured it would be a 5-minute delay and I'd be off again. I arrived back and asked him what was wrong. He said it was the water pump and he had the new part ready to go. And I said, "Have you ever changed one before?" He said, "No." I asked if he knew how to do it, and he said, "No." I couldn't believe a man would attempt to a repair like this without the knowledge to do it. I told him I would get my tools and be right back. I replaced the part and accepted lunch as a payment. While I was at lunch, I thought I would get some more praise by asking what in the world would he have done if I had not stopped to help. He replied, "I've got to be honest. My wife and I prayed for God to guide my hands to fix the car. I never thought he would bring us a mechanic." I was humbled immediately. I could not believe that God had used me, a non-Christian, to help these Christians. I knew that day that God's children were on the winning team, and I had to admit his power was real. So now, without thinking, without trying to sort it out or anything, very quickly write down what you're feeling at this moment. Just your impulse, your first thought. Don't think about it too hard. What are you feeling right now? Okay. All right. Now, once again, without explaining or going into any details, would some of you please just share what you wrote down? You'll have to unmute yourself probably.
I typed out Providence, God orchestrates the events of our days.
Okay. What did you feel?
I hadn't thought of that, but just peace that God is.
Okay. Peace. All right. Someone else?
I wrote down that God always provides.
Okay. And what did you feel? Not what did you think? What did you feel?
That he always provides.
Okay. Okay.
He's consistent.
All right. He's consistency, faithfulness. Okay. Someone else. Hi, Ty. Someone else? What did you feel?
I felt grateful to God.
Grateful. Okay.
I'll break the mold a tiny bit. I identified with the mechanic. I wrote tired and stuck.
Okay. All right. Good. Anyone else? What did you feel? Anyone else? All right. The point of that is that stories are powerful. They help, they cause emotional reactions, they cause thoughts, they bring us into a person's life. And that story was heard by a friend of mine in Bible study one time. And she thought, you know what? I bet there's a lot of other stories like this. So we went on a journey to collect stories at our church, First Baptist Church in Fair Oaks. And we put together a book of the stories. And so when we were starting to do this, I dragged this book out and started rereading the stories. And what I realized, some of these stories are really, awesome and encouraging and stuff, but a lot of them, people were honest and they were revealing. Some were actually repenting. Some were talking about confusion. People were opening up and sharing their lives and what God had done in that. And so what you see is that our stories are very personal and they're often very intimate. And I think that's one of the barriers that we have in sharing our stories. They're personal, and sharing things that are that deeply personal, it's risky, it's hard, but they're not supposed to be private. God tells us to share them. So that's what I'm going to do tonight. I am going to share some parts of my story. I had to trim it down because it was getting pretty long. So the first thing that I'm going to share is, you guys have heard me talk about that I have this deformed heart. So since a lot of my stories in life revolve around this, I thought I would let you know what it was. So I believe you can see my cursor, yes? Okay, so normally the blood comes from the body to think of this as you're looking in a mirror type of thing, to the right side of the heart, and then is pumped to the lungs, gets oxygen, comes back to the heart, goes through this aortic valve, down the aorta and back to the body to deliver oxygen. Well, my heart had some issues. This septum here, this wall between the two ventricles, something went wrong. There's a big hole there. And that aortic valve is not sitting in the right side of the heart, it's sitting over both chambers in that hole. And then if you compare the opening to the pulmonary artery here versus here, you can see it's really narrow. Okay. And so what happens is, first of all, because this is narrow, you're not pumping a lot of blood to the lungs. And you have this hole, which is pumping blood that doesn't have oxygen through the hole and mixing it with the oxygenated blood. So you have blood that doesn't have the oxygen it's supposed to have. And this thick wall here that you see, that's because, over the months of pumping against the pressure of that. So that is what my heart is. So as I've thought about this, I've looked at how I've seen him in my life. What areas have I seen him in? And the first thing that comes is he's been present, his presence. I have never not been aware of Jesus. He's always been with me. Even as a child, I used to, if I was distressed, especially if I was asking for my heart to be healed, I would hear my name whispered in my right ear. And as a kid, I'm like, that's Jesus. Jesus is talking to me. As I got older, I thought it had to be my imagination, but I think it was Jesus. I think it was Jesus telling me he was with me. So I've always had his presence, no matter what was going on. I've wondered all my life, why? Why did God do that? Why did he choose me to be with me all my life and to draw me to him? And I always thought, well, maybe it's because he knew I would need him, which I did. Then I remembered a couple years ago something my father told me. He told me about how when he brought me home from the hospital, it was about 5 pounds, 4 ounces. It would turn blue when I would eat. I would turn blue when I would cry. I would turn blue when I would poop. I just would turn blue, sometimes get limp, sometimes pass out. And so he brought this little baby home that they had no idea what my future would be. He took me out to the backyard, raised me to heaven, and asked God to take me as his and spare my life. I think God answered my father's prayer. And he took me. And I am grateful, so grateful that my father brought God's presence to my life as an infant. So presence is the first thing. The second one is protection. He has protected me from a bunch of things. Just before my second birthday, I was having what they call tet spells. When I would fall, when I would cry, whatever, I'd turn blue and pass out. Also, my mom will tell you that I also had times when I'd get mad and hold my breath and pass out. They had a very strong-willed child on their hands, I'm afraid. So the doctor said, you know, it's time, we have to do something about it. So what they did, now, by the way, my aorta, this one curves to the right, mine curves to the left. So all of these vessels are opposite. So this is on the left side for me, not the right side. So they took this artery, which is the artery that goes to the left arm, connected it to the artery that goes to the lungs so I would get more blood to the lungs. Now, this artery, the common carotid artery, that's an artery that goes straight to your brain and is a major source of blood to your brain. In order to get enough room to make this happen, they had to tie that off. So I have no carotid on the left side. So I just have one artery feeding my brain. You can imagine it's probably not a good idea for the brain to lose oxygen and pass out. And it is true that there can be brain damage from this, especially early on. This was a very new procedure. The Nobel Prize for doing cardiac catheterizations was awarded 2 years after I was born. So I was on the cusp of all of this being developed. And yet I didn't suffer from that. I've never had a seizure. I never had a stroke. I never had any serious injuries. But he's protected my brain in another way as well. So I had surgery to repair my heart when I was 16. And when they did that, they took that shunt down because I no longer needed it. When I was in residency, I started having episodes of weakness on the left side that looked like a stroke. When they worked me up, they found that there was a blood clot in a pouch that was a residual of that shunt that they had taken down. And they thought I was throwing blood clots to my brain from there. So they decided to go in and sew that pouch up so that that blood clot would not be able to move, remove the blood clot and all that. Problem is, if you disturb a blood clot, it can loosen and go places, and they didn't want it to go to my brain. So in order to protect my brain, they clamped my only carotid artery. They then clamped around the blood clot and then opened up that artery. Well, they had me on an EEG monitor and my brain was not happy at all. And so they put me into a coma for a while to protect my brain. But you know what? It protected my brain. Like I said, never had a seizure, never had a stroke. Those spells ended up being migraines. So I had open heart surgery for migraines. Who figures? Anyway, God protected me. There's another way that he protected me because the surgery I had when I was 2 didn't fix my heart. It just kept me alive. In fact, they told my parents after the surgery that if I hadn't had it, I probably would not have seen my 4th birthday. So it kept me alive, but I was still pretty impaired and I couldn't run and I couldn't participate and all of that. So I spent a lot of time with adults, but I also tried to find ways to play with the kids. So for example, when my brothers would play Army, I would volunteer to watch the fort, right? So I'm sitting there watching them play and I don't get anything to do unless someone comes to the fort and I have to scare them away. So it was a way of sort of participating, but it's also a way that you're still alone and just watching things. And so I never had a peer group. I was often left out, ignored. Friends wouldn't walk with me and things like that. And so it was kind of a lonely childhood. But I always knew I was loved. And even though there's a lot of pain associated with that, I have no anger. I have no bitterness. I only think the Holy Spirit can do that. There's another way that God, this was amazing, God's presence is known. So as most of you know, when I was in my 40s, I had my heart fixed when I was 16. I had a great time for several years, got married, went to medical school, had a normal, quote, normal life, was active, all that good stuff. And then in my 40s, my heart started failing on me again. And I had surgery again, had stents placed, nothing worked. So I went to the heart transplant clinic to see if that was an option. At that time, I thought, well, heart failure, average lifespan is 8 years. So went to that clinic, and if you've ever seen athletes on a treadmill wearing a mask, that's a test called a VO2 test. And what it tests is how quickly your body runs out of using oxygen and goes from aerobic to anaerobic metabolism. And that metabolism is done in a part of the cell called the mitochondria. The mitochondria use glucose and oxygen to produce energy. So if you use that up quickly, you lose your energy quickly. So I had that test and the doctor showed me my curve and he said, well, it's really steep. You run out of oxygen pretty quick. No surprise there. He said, but what's really interesting is that you come out of it very quickly. He says, that's not normal. Well, and usually it's very gradual, but you come out of it very quickly. And then he said, wouldn't you like to know how your mitochondria are different? And that hit me. And particularly on the way home for the next several days, I'm just like, God, are you so intimate that you would change the very structure of my cells? Can you imagine? God is even concerned about the cells of my body and how they work. And he did that to protect me so that I could have a normal life, so I could keep living. So there were a lot of things. The other area that I see that God has worked in my life is through provision. And the provision is mostly through people. Like I told you, I had my parents, and they were good parents. They did not hold me back. They let me figure out what I could do and what I could not do. They disciplined me like they disciplined my brothers. They didn't coddle me. They didn't treat me as some kind of poor, disabled kid. They let me grow and find my way. That was awesome. I was grateful for that and for that protection, provision. And then when I was 16 and had my repair, when I was in the hospital, I got over 100 get well cards from my church. What an encouragement. All these people praying for me and caring for me. And there's just lots of other ones I could talk about. Friends that have helped me. There's one friend, I didn't want to be alone. I was very upset. I tried going to church on Sunday night and I couldn't even go into the building. I was crying so much. So I went to her house. Kathy, can I just come in and cry? Yeah, come in, cry. That's fine. But here's another kind of amazing one. As you guys know, in 2019, was having problems with arrhythmias. And I had to go in one time to have my heart shocked to try and get it back into a normal rhythm because I was not doing well. So I get there and the nurse who was there is about my age. She knows some of the same people and we're just chatting, having a great time. And then she says, you know, the cardiologist that is on today isn't the typical person. Usually it's just the general cardiologist, but this is one of the interventional cardiologists. That means this is a guy who does cardiac caths and stents and all this kind of work in the heart. And he comes in and he says, I have no idea why I'm on this schedule. It's very rare that I'm on, but I'm on, so here I am. This is a guy, if anything goes wrong, he can fix it, right? And then the anesthesiologist comes in and she came from UCSF, where she was a pediatric, where she did anesthesia for pediatric cardiac cases. She knew all about congenital heart disease and how anesthesia is supposed to work. So here I am, surrounded by all these people who weren't supposed to be there that day, but they were there for me. God provided. He provided what I needed. But it hasn't just been medical stuff. I mean, it's been other stuff too. I mean, I have all the life issues everyone does. You know, after my husband left in 97, and then I had to close my practice in 98, and my heart wasn't yet feeling, but it was getting close. I was trying to work 2 part-time jobs, my income was maybe a third of what I was used to. It was a tough time. And I was in an accident that totaled my car. At the same time, my refrigerator quit. And for some reason, my dogs tore up the vinyl flooring in my kitchen. I haven't a clue why they did that, but they did. So I have total car, no fridge, and this floor that's a mess. So I asked God this. I said, Lord, would you give me enough money in this settlement for the car to buy a new fridge, get new flooring, put a down payment on a new car so that my monthly payments would be lower and I could afford it better. And if there's anything left over, I'll give it to the church as a gift. I gave $2,000 to the church. I don't know how to describe that. Another thing that I see that God has done is give me a purpose. Sometimes hard to find a purpose when your life is very different than the normal and you can't do normal things. But because I could see that my life was different, that God was allowing all these good things to happen to me and preserving my life, that it had to be a reason for me to be there. So I always kind of knew that. Junior high school was really tough for me. we lived a few miles from, or a few blocks, I'm sorry, from my house. And so we'd walk home from school. Well, often I would have to stop and rest, slow down, whatever. I just, walking, I couldn't just walk home. I certainly couldn't run home. And so it was very common for whoever was walking with me that day to just leave me. And that was very hurtful. And my mom, she got to comfort me a lot. And she would just say, honey, I'm sorry, but kids are mean. And during that time, I kind of realized, you know what? I might not be able to run. I might not be able to walk far. I might not be able to do all these physical things, but I can be kind. I'm going to work on being kind. From what I understand, it's kind of unusual for someone that's, 12, 13 years old to recognize that and to work on that. When I was in college, well, let me go back a little bit. Because of my health issues, when I was a kid, I always played doctor, despite the fact that my grandfather said, girls are nurses and boys are doctors, right? But my mom did have to sit me down and say, look, hon, your heart is too weak. You could not be a doctor with your weak heart. So I gave up. And then I had my surgery at 16. And I had a normal life, got to go to medical school, all that kind of stuff. But in college, I was going to be a med tech. That's where I started. And so I drew blood on weekends to support myself through school. And I was in a room with a woman who had just bad arthritis and her hands were all crippled and she could hardly straighten her elbow. And as I was drawing her blood, I thought about how Jesus healed the withered hand. And I was kind of talking to him about, God, Jesus, I know you don't do that kind of stuff these days, but if you could just come down and touch her, she's such a sweet lady. She's so gentle and nice. She deserves you to come down and touch her and heal her hands. And as I walked out the door, that voice that kind of sounds like your voice in your head, but isn't your words, said, that's your job. That's your job. There's a new purpose. So off to medical school I went. When everything fell apart in my 40s, and my husband left, my practice closed from mismanagement, and then I got heart failure. It was very difficult, particularly losing my profession and losing the ability to be a doctor. And I couldn't understand, how can you call me to this profession? How can you call me? I had a purpose, I had meaning, I had work for you to do, and it's gone. I can't do it now. It was a very difficult time. But I made the decision to get out of the house every single day, get dressed and get out of the house every single day. I was not going to just hold up. And usually it was to take a book and go have lunch. So I did that one day. I went to Chipotle. I was there right when it opened, as was another man. He was older in front of me, and he'd never been there before. And he was having trouble understanding what it was he was supposed to do. So I kind of walked him down the line and helped him get his burrito and all of that, and then had my lunch and read my book. And as I left, he stopped me and said, thank you for that. It was very helpful. I enjoyed it, and I plan on coming back. And I don't know what it is about me indoors, but anyway, as I walked out the door, God says, see, you can be kind. And I realized all along, my purpose has been to bring God's love into this world through acts of kindness. That's his purpose for me. I can do that regardless. I can do that even if I'm sitting at home, unable to move that day. I can be kind. I can bring God's love into this world. Medicine was a vehicle for that for a while, but it wasn't my full purpose. So those are the ways that I have seen him work in my life. Well, that all sounds good, but that doesn't tell my side of the story, because my side of the story is I wasn't always faithful to him. Like I told you, I tend to have this rebellious spirit, strong-willed kid that, hold your breath and pass out. Who does that? And it wasn't, as I entered adulthood, particularly, this got bad. And it wasn't a sudden decision. It was kind of a slow process that this happened. And it started I would say, in college. So I was working weekends, and what happens when you work weekends? You can't go to church because church is on Sunday. And so when you don't go to church, you're not reminded to read your Bible, and you don't have fellowship. And, I would try and do some things on campus, but, those were here and there, whatever. I never did anything bad. I didn't get involved with the drugs or anything, but I just wasn't quite as into it anymore. And then when I went to medical school, there was a group of medical students that wanted to form a Bible study. I was real excited. We started to do that. But the first meeting, the entire meeting, was an argument about whether the women should be able to lead the Bible study. That's not going to work. So, and the first year, I kind of got in with the church and had a family that supported me. But as medical school went on, when you're on the clinical wards, a day off is going in, checking on your patients, making sure everything is okay, and then going home. You're not on call, so you're off. So, but once again, you're working Sundays. And what happens when you work Sundays? You can't go to church because church is on Sunday. So once again, the lack of fellowship and the lack of help to focus on my Christian life. And that's where I met my husband. One of my classmates, I fell in love with him. We became sexually active very quickly. And I was just enamored with this guy. He was not a Christian. And I told God, you know what? I know this is wrong, but I'm going to do it anyway. And you know what? I know you'll forgive me. What hubris, right? How can you say something like that to God? Oh my gosh. That's what I did. And God gave me what I asked for. And I had a marriage without a husband that supported me going to church, and children who were raised by parents that had different worldviews, and a man who had affairs and left me. God gave me what I asked for, but he healed me. Losing my husband, losing my family, losing my career, losing my health, losing everything I thought I was. That's where God had to bring me back to him. He had never left me. He was always there. And he was still always providing. And I always find it kind of interesting that I did all of this rebellion while preparing for the profession he called me to. Kind of interesting. But anyway, he brought me back. And all I can say is, as painful as some of that has been, I wouldn't change a thing. I would not change a thing. So, what are your stories? That's what we're looking at now. What are your stories? Mine is a little dramatic because of the health issues. But that doesn't make it better than anyone else's. Your story is unique to you, and God will use your story to influence people and to bring his love into this world. And so what is your story? It will be personal. It'll be hard to share because it's personal. It's absolutely personal, and it's private, and it's between you and God. I mean, it's personal and intimate because it's between you and God, but it's not private. It's not private. It's to be shared. So that's my question for you. That's all I have. Thank you for letting me share. and taking your time, and we'll open it up for questions or comments or whatever else you want to do. Thanks.